In May 1953, at Clarence House on the Mall, Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother, is settling into the London residence that her daughter has just vacated. Before lunch, a drink is expected: Dubonnet, gin, ice, lemon. The exact hour is disputed, and the famous story of a trolley arriving at precisely 10:50 each morning belongs to later retellings, rather than a surviving household timetable. The underlying routine is better documented. Someone prepares it, someone carries it, someone knows when to appear, and someone makes sure the visitor at the door isn't still waiting when lunch begins. That is the useful way to approach the label, the Drunken Queen Mother. It's a joke about consumption, but Clarence House reveals a larger mechanism. Elizabeth's preferences became schedules. Schedules became work. Work required gatekeepers, drivers, cooks, footmen, ladies-in-waiting, private secretaries, suppliers, and relatives to keep moving around her. The Queen Mother didn't rule Britain from Clarence House. Buckingham Palace remained the monarch's principal administrative and ceremonial center, and she held no separate constitutional office after 1952. Her power was quieter and more social. A place at her lunch table, a private audience, an introduction, or an invitation to one of her receptions could confer recognition that no ordinary letter could provide. Clarence House turned personal habit into institutional routine, and the real authority lay in the number of lives that routine could organize. Elizabeth Angela Marguerite Bowes-Lyon was born on 4 August 1900. She married the future George VI in 1923, became Queen Consort after Edward VIII abdicated on 11 December 1936, and was crowned at Westminster Abbey on 12 May 1937. When George VI died on 6 February 1952, their elder daughter became Elizabeth II. The succession rearranged the family's geography. Princess Elizabeth and Prince Philip had lived at Clarence House after their marriage in 1947. Their daughter Anne was born there on 15 August 1950. After the accession, the new queen moved to Buckingham Palace, leaving Clarence House available for her widowed mother and Princess Margaret. The Queen Mother didn't move in on the day George VI died. The residence was prepared, redecorated, and reorganized first. Some later accounts say she initially called it loathsome, a remark preserved through secondary reporting rather than an official record. By May 1953, shortly before the coronation, she and Princess Margaret had moved in. The precedent mattered. Clarence House was smaller than Buckingham Palace, but it was never merely an ordinary London home. It stood beside St. James's Palace, close to the Mall and within walking distance of Buckingham Palace. It had royal history, royal staff, and royal traffic, yet it offered a more intimate setting than the monarch's principal palace. The Queen Mother inherited a house that could function as a family residence, a workplace, an entertaining venue, and a social doorway into the wider establishment. The Royal Collection Trust records that she hosted luncheons and evening receptions there, and that foreign heads of state called at Clarence House for tea on the afternoon of the first day of an official state visit. That single detail places the house beyond the category of private domestic life. A foreign leader might conduct formal business elsewhere, but the first afternoon still included tea with the Queen Mother. In 1960, after Princess Margaret married and left for Kensington Palace, the Queen Mother opened out 2 ground-floor rooms to create the garden room. The new space was designed for larger gatherings. Its 4 windows looked onto the garden, and its purpose was straightforward. More guests required more room. Architecture followed hospitality. Hospitality followed rank. The Queen Mother's daily rhythm was reported in different versions, but the broad pattern is consistent. A maid knocked at her bedroom door at about 7:30 in the morning. Tea, pink roses, and the racing post were brought in. She took an early bath, ate breakfast in the breakfast room, and then William Talon walked the corgis Rush, Minnie, and Dash. That sequence looks domestic until the job descriptions are counted. A maid delivered the first tray. Another member of staff was involved in the breakfast service. Talon handled the dogs. The racing post arrived with the tea and roses, linking the morning ritual to her long-standing interest in racing. Before the Queen Mother had seen her first caller, several people had already begun work. Guests were received through the late morning, with one account placing the end of the calling period at approximately 11:45. The pre-lunch drink is variously placed at 11:45 or noon. The familiar mixture was Dubonnet and gin, served with ice and lemon. In winter, some accounts describe sherry. In summer, Pimm's. These aren't details of a single theatrical drinking binge. They describe a repeated hospitality pattern. Lunch might be served in a corner of the drawing room or outside in the garden. When no visitors were present, the Queen Mother commonly ate with a lady-in-waiting and two members of the household's home team. When visitors were present, lunch became a small social production involving guests, senior aides, and domestic staff. The evening had its own marker. Major Colin Burgess, who served as an equerry, recalled the Queen Mother asking at 6 o'clock, "Colin, are we at the magic hour?" He mixed her dry martini. The line survives because it gives a voice to the routine, but the routine itself is the important evidence. The drink appeared at a known stage of the day because someone knew the stage was coming. Margaret Rhodes, the Queen Mother's niece and a woman of the bedchamber, described the pattern as one that never varied. She also recorded the Queen Mother's travel note. "I think that I will take 2 small bottles of Dubonnet and gin with me this morning, in case it's needed." The note turns preference into logistics. A drink associated with lunch at Clarence House was also something to pack before leaving for another residence. The Queen Mother moved between Clarence House, Royal Lodge, Birk Hall, Castle of May, and Walmer Castle. Staff traveled with her, and the general sequence of meals, drinks, correspondence, and entertaining traveled as well. Dinner could include 1 or 2 glasses of pink champagne, often identified as Veuve Clicquot. Guests might be offered gin and tonic with Angostura bitters and lime. A Fabergé bell reportedly signaled bedtime, after which a watchman took up position outside the bedroom door. The bell was small. The labor around it wasn't. A breakfast tray, a drink before lunch, a martini at 6, champagne at dinner, and a watchman at night sound like personal details. Together, they describe a system of timed service. The Queen Mother didn't have to announce each movement of the day. Staff had learned the sequence and learned which parts could be adjusted without allowing the adjustment to become visible. That is why the exact 1050 gin trolley story is less important than its popularity. Modern videos often present a perfectly choreographed trolley arriving at a fixed minute with Gordon's gin, Dubonnet, cut glass tumblers, and ice. The research record does not establish that choreography or prove that the same trolley arrived every morning for 50 years. But audiences recognize the story because it expresses something real. A royal preference had become imaginable as a scheduled household event. A household does not need a written timetable to operate like one. By the mid-1950s, Clarence House had a formal administrative layer as well as its domestic one. Oliver Dubonnet served as private secretary before Lieutenant Colonel Sir Martin Gilliat succeeded him in 1956. Gilliat remained in the post until his death in 1993, a period of approximately 37 years. His office handled correspondence, engagements, and arrangements. That placed him between the outside world and the Queen Mother's time. Letters arrived from people seeking contact. Invitations had to be assessed. Engagements had to be scheduled. Visitors had to be briefed and received. The office didn't need to issue a dramatic refusal to control access. It only had to decide what reached the diary. By 1974, Captain Sir Alistair Aird was comptroller and extra equerry. He was responsible for the Queen Mother's homes, staff, and entertaining. When Gilliat grew older, Aird double-checked arrangements. After Gilliat died in 1993, Aird became private secretary and continued the same administrative and gatekeeping function. The structure was layered. A private secretary dealt with correspondence and the diary. The comptroller supervised homes, staff, and entertaining. Equerries handled official and personal arrangements. Ladies-in-waiting and women of the bedchamber managed proximity and routine. Senior domestic servants controlled movement through private rooms and the practical choreography below stairs. So when someone asked, "Want an audience with the Queen Mother?" the answer didn't depend only on whether she happened to be in the house. The question passed through a network of people who knew her day, her energy, her engagements, her visitors, and her preferences. The question itself does not prove improper conduct, and it tells us nothing about how much she drank. It identifies access as a household resource. Clarence House could admit a foreign head of state for tea, host a charity representative at lunch, receive a close friend in the drawing room, or decline a request through a lady-in-waiting's letter. The letter was polite, personal, and final. The visitor didn't reach the room because the household had already placed the Queen Mother elsewhere. That is access in its most ordinary form. No scandal is necessary. A date, a location, and a courtier's letter are enough. A memoir-derived account describes a prospective official moving from rank outsider to frontrunner after being invited to lunch with the Queen Mother at Clarence House. The full identity and consequence aren't supplied, so the claim shouldn't be stretched into proof of a specific appointment or favor. It does show the social value attached to being seen at her table. Royal proximity worked through signals. An invitation suggested trust. A private lunch placed a guest inside a circle of relatives, officials, and established friends. A reception could connect a visitor to senior figures who would never have answered a cold approach. A foreign head of state received official recognition through tea. A charity representative gained the prestige of royal association. None of this made the Queen Mother a parallel government. Clarence House didn't replace Buckingham Palace, and she didn't possess the formal constitutional authority of the reigning monarch. Her influence was informal, relational, and dependent on the meaning people attached to her attention. That kind of power is difficult to count. There is no supplied visitor ledger listing every admission, delay, or refusal, and no reliable measure of what each audience produced. The household's influence appears instead in the structure around it. Correspondence offices, official invitations, carefully staged lunches, receptions, staff who knew who was expected, and courtiers who kept the calendar from collapsing. The person most associated with the practical side of that structure was William John Stevenson Tallon. His exact entry date is disputed. Some accounts place him in royal service at 15. Another places his arrival at Clarence House in 1951 at 17. Other accounts attach him to the Queen Mother's household in 1952. The safe point is broader. Tallon entered royal service as a teenager and remained closely associated with the Queen Mother for roughly half a century. He became known as Backstairs Billy and served as steward and page of the backstairs. The title sounds comic until the duties are unpacked. Tallon handled below-stairs service, managed physical access to private rooms, coordinated guests and lunch arrangements, purchased Christmas presents for the Queen Mother to give, cared for her collections and corgis, helped organize public birthday greetings, and prepared or arranged drinks. One account says he was on duty from early morning until the Queen Mother went to bed. That is a long working day even before travel, receptions, and public engagements are added. Tallon's position also carried unusual privilege. He could enter her private rooms without knocking, and he became a trusted companion as well as a servant. The relationship crossed class boundaries without erasing them. Tallon had access that most members of the household didn't, but he remained part of the household's service hierarchy. Private secretaries, comptrollers, and senior courtiers held different authority. He could control movement through the backstairs and private quarters without formally controlling every decision made at Clarence House. His work combined personal service, event management, social presentation, and access control. A guest might experience only the Queen Mother's charm. Talon had to know where the guest should stand, when the drink should appear, which room was ready, and whether the Queen Mother could be interrupted. He wasn't simply carrying a glass. In 1970, Talon is credited with organizing the Queen Mother's practice of greeting well-wishers at the gates of Clarence House on her birthday. The public saw a royal figure appearing spontaneously at the entrance. Talon is credited with organizing the practice of greeting well-wishers at the gates. A public ritual had been built from domestic knowledge. The same pattern appears in the Queen Mother's entertaining. Clarence House became known for lunches, dinners, picnics, and cocktail-heavy receptions. A 1979 description portrays champagne flowing at receptions, and Talon guiding proceedings while also caring for the corgis. The account is a single later source, not a complete record of the year's events, but it fits the better documented division of labor. Senior staff organized the occasion, while domestic servants sustained it. A report on Talon says that at lunch parties, he ensured guests had something to drink. The detail is associated with later journalism and shouldn't be treated as a universal rule for every party. Its value is more practical. It shows how the public image of generosity depended on someone monitoring glasses, guests, and timing. At Clarence House, hospitality wasn't only a matter of what the hostess wished to offer. It was the work of noticing who had arrived, who had been served, who had finished, who needed an introduction, and who was about to leave. Frances Campbell Preston entered the household in 1965 as a woman of the bedchamber and remained until the Queen Mother's death in 2002. She accompanied her between Clarence House, Burke Hall, Castle of May, and Royal Lodge. Her long service makes her one of the clearest examples of continuity across the household's different locations. An obituary records the formalities of her day. She curtsied once in the morning, once at lunch, and again when saying goodnight. Another detail describes breakfast in bed being brought by a footman and passed to a housemaid. The meal traveled through a chain. A kitchen prepared it. A footman carried it. A housemaid participated in the service. Campbell Preston maintained the formal relationship. The Queen Mother received breakfast. Several people performed the conditions that made breakfast appear effortless. Close personal service didn't abolish hierarchy. It made hierarchy intimate. The old court language could make these roles sound ornamental. Woman of the bedchamber suggests ceremony. In practice, it meant years of movement between residences, formal calls, private routine, and public engagements. Page of the backstairs sounds like a theatrical title. In practice, it meant access, errands, guests, drinks, animals, and a working day that could stretch from morning until bedtime. The household's senior officials carried a different burden. Aird's obituary in the Times describes his work coordinating the diary, correspondence, and peripatetic life of the Queen Mother. Clarence House was her headquarters during the week. Royal Lodge was her weekend retreat. Burke Hall and Castle of May were Scottish homes. Walmer Castle, used during her annual period as Lord Warden of the Cinque Ports, created what the obituary calls a logistical nightmare. Linen, china, silver, and even the dining room table had to be transported from Clarence House. The table is the detail that changes the scale of the story. A dining room isn't just a room when the household carries the room to another building. The Queen Mother's social world traveled with its objects, its etiquette, and its staff. The same ceremony could be recreated elsewhere because the system was portable. Aird also had to manage conflict among staff below stairs. Former colleagues described emotional disputes when privileges, perquisites, or carefully guarded roles seemed threatened. The evidence does not show that every employee experienced Clarence House in the same way. and it does not establish a uniquely abusive workplace. It does show an intensely hierarchical environment in which roles mattered enough to provoke disputes. The more personal the service, the more valuable the position could become. Long-serving staff gained expertise, status, and proximity. They also became difficult to replace because they knew the household's unwritten rules. Sir Martin Gilliatt served for 37 years. Campbell Preston served from 1965 to 2002. Talon remained associated with the Queen Mother for approximately half a century. Arthur Barty, a Perthshire farm worker, became her personal chauffeur for nearly 3 decades. Those lengths of service indicate loyalty and prestige, but they also reveal dependence. The Times described a band of retainers who felt obliged to remain in the household, where retirement was viewed with disfavor by the woman they served. That is one obituary's characterization, not a survey of staff experience. It can't prove pressure across the whole household. It does show how personal authority could outlast ordinary employment expectations. A royal residence preserved its own sense of time. One review of Ty Monroe's memoir describes him as an under-butler at Clarence House, responsible to Talon. Monroe's book is a first-hand account of working below stairs, but the available excerpts don't provide enough detailed incidents to reconstruct his daily experience. That gap matters. The surviving record is richer for senior aides than for junior servants. There are named accounts from equerries, ladies-in-waiting, private secretaries, and chauffeurs. Lower-ranking workers appear less often by name. Anonymous testimony and social media claims describe fear, resentment, or universal hatred. But those claims lack primary corroboration. They can't be used to declare that every servant despised the Queen Mother. The evidence supports something more precise: demanding, continuous, and highly formal service, performed across a residence with many layers of rank. Even affection could be hierarchical. Talon was remembered as funny, flamboyant, and charming, but also as domineering. Ty Monroe's memoir describes the organization below stairs, while accounts of Talon's close relationship with the Queen Mother show how a servant could become a confidant without becoming an equal. That contradiction is central to Clarence House. The household could offer status and shelter to a valued servant while retaining the power to dismiss, relocate, or replace him. Proximity could be a privilege and an obligation at the same time. The most vivid local nickname attached to the Queen Mother is the Chief Toad. It should be handled carefully. The phrase comes from an online comment by someone claiming that a cousin worked as an undergardener around Balmoral and Ballater. The comment says local workers use the label. A separate video investigation traces it to a family memory involving an undergardener and places the reported usage during a 1986 summer stay at Birkhall. No named undergardener has been identified. No dated primary testimony confirms the phrase. No independent print source establishes that it was widely used, and the reported location is Balmoral, Ballater, or Birkhall, rather than Clarence House. So, the Chief Toad isn't an established universal nickname. It's a second-hand social clue. It suggests that the Queen Mother's reputation could circulate among gardeners, gamekeepers, and kitchen workers away from London. But it can't prove that Clarence House staff shared one opinion of her. The label is useful precisely because it's weak. It shows how quickly a local story can become a general image once it's repeated online. The affectionate public caricature and the hostile private nickname perform the same trick. Both reduce a complicated household to a memorable personality. The better evidence is less colorful and more revealing. In 2002, contemporary reports described approximately 50 people connected with the Queen Mother's Clarence House household. The roles included housekeepers, butlers, footmen, pages, chefs, equerries, ladies-in-waiting, dressers, gardeners, chauffeurs, and a night watchman. The figures shouldn't be treated as a permanent Clarence House-only rota. Some staff served across more than one residence. Even with that qualification, the list exposes the size of the operation. A private residence with gardeners, chauffeurs, chefs, dressers, footmen, pages, and an overnight watchman is a workplace with domestic rooms attached. The Queen Mother's public image depended on this workforce remaining mostly invisible. The documented coordination can be read as making preparation disappear into ease. A guest arrived at Clarence House and saw the Queen Mother in a drawing room, a garden, or a dining room. The guest didn't see the breakfast carried between rooms, the linens moved to another residence, the correspondence screened by a private secretary, the car waiting outside, the corgis exercised before the first caller, or the watchman taking position at night. What looked like informality required discipline. The financial system extended the same operation beyond the staff corridors. Clarence House was connected to the wider royal household, rather than functioning as an entirely independent estate. The master of the households department handled domestic arrangements, catering, official entertaining, housekeeping, and royal kitchens across royal residences. Transport involved the royal mews, the crown equerry, and the royal travel office. Finance ran through the privy purse and treasurer's office. A bottle of Dubonnet, therefore, belonged to a larger chain. The drink had to be purchased, stored, opened, mixed, and served. Food entered through kitchens and suppliers. China, glassware, and silver had to be washed and maintained. Laundry had to move with the household when the Queen Mother traveled. Cars, trains, boats, and aircraft required staff, schedules, and payment. The available records don't provide a Clarence House ledger showing how many bottles were consumed or how much was spent on the Queen Mother's drinks. Royal warrants identify suppliers of food, champagne, spirits, and soft drinks, but they don't prove that a particular company supplied a specific Clarence House event or reveal the quantities involved. That distinction is important. Infrastructure is evidence of capacity, not proof of individual consumption. The household's official income is better documented. The civil list, Increase of Financial Provision Order 1990, increased the Queen Mother's annual payment from £334,400 to £643,000, effective 1 January 1991. The payment was intended for salaries and household expenses. Contemporary reporting also describes support from several sources: the Queen's privy purse and contributions from the Prince of Wales through the Duchy of Cornwall. Claims that the entire household was paid directly by taxpayers are inaccurate. At the same time, press reports estimated annual household costs at between £1 million and £2 million and described additional private subsidies. The debt figures aren't consistent. Some reports mention an overdraft of approximately £4 million at Coutts. Others give figures in dollars or refer to total liabilities approaching $14 million. Without a public audited Clarence House ledger, those amounts can't be reconciled confidently. What can be said is narrower and stronger. A household that employed dozens of people, maintained several residences, supported racing interests, hosted frequent entertainments, and transported staff and equipment required substantial money. The cost wasn't located in the glass alone. It lay in wages, buildings, transport, food, heating, laundry, maintenance, and the expectation that royal standards would remain visible. The Queen Mother herself understood the importance of appearances. William Shawcross's official biography, reviewed by the Los Angeles Times, records her belief in maintaining a regal standard involving large motor cars, special trains, and all the things that are expected of the mother of the sovereign. Her furniture could become threadbare while the household continued to project grandeur. During her absence, daughters and staff reportedly had worn upholstery replaced with identical fabric so that she wouldn't notice the change. The contrast is almost too neat. Frayed curtains behind a public image of abundance, an old refrigerator preserved while wages and transport continued, a household that could economize on furnishings, but not easily abandon the rituals attached to rank. The financial pressure wasn't caused by alcohol alone. Racing, horses, residences, staff, and entertaining all contributed to the expense. The drinking stories became memorable because they were easy to picture. Accounts, payrolls, and linen tables are harder to turn into a national joke. That is why the Drunken label distorts the household. It takes one visible preference and makes it explain everything else. The strongest evidence does show that the Queen Mother drank regularly. Around noon, accounts describe Dubonnet and gin. At 6, Major Colin Burgess recalled the dry martini and the magic hour. Wine and sometimes port accompanied lunch. Pink champagne appeared at dinner. Guests drank at receptions. Other evidence is less tidy. Adrian Tinniswood's account characterizes her drinking as steady rather than excessive. Margaret Rhodes disputed descriptions of her as an insane drunk and corrected the popular assumption that she preferred gin and tonic, saying the mixture was closer to gin and martini. Lady Colin Campbell is quoted as saying, "She liked her gin, but she was never a drunk." Later writers have calculated as many as 70 alcohol units a week from reported routines. That number is an estimate built from retrospective assumptions, not a contemporaneous drink log. There is no supplied medical record diagnosing alcohol use disorder, no treatment record, and no reliable evidence of habitual incapacity at Clarence House. The careful conclusion isn't that the drinking was insignificant. Multiple named accounts describe alcohol across the day, and some retrospective sources portray substantial consumption. The evidence does not establish clinical alcoholism. The title's stigma is therefore weaker than its cultural reach. Drunken Queen Mother survives as shorthand because it compresses a complex woman into a comic image: the widow with a glass, the royal who slipped away to a pub in 1977, the hostess whose parties were said to run on champagne and martinis. But a glass does not answer who carried it, who arranged the lunch, who screened the caller, who transported the china, who drove the car, who paid the wages, or who waited outside the bedroom door. Clarence House becomes most legible when the drink is returned to its place inside the system. The Queen Mother's household wasn't unique in having servants or ceremonial routines. Other royal households also depended on layers of domestic, administrative, and transport staff. The available evidence does not show that her workplace was uniquely abusive or unlawful. It shows a particular combination of longevity, informality, and hierarchy. The Queen Mother liked an atmosphere of ease. She also maintained formal daily rituals. She tolerated unusual personalities among her staff, yet the household preserved rank through curtsies, titles, and restricted access. She could be warm with servants and still expect them to remain available. A trusted aide could enter without knocking while a visitor's request was declined by letter. The friendliness didn't cancel the structure. It made the structure more durable. When Princess Margaret left Clarence House in 1960, the house became the Queen Mother's independent London domain. The garden room expanded its capacity. From 1965, Campbell Preston supplied continuity. In 1970, Talon helped turn birthday greetings at the gates into a recurring public ritual. In 1974, Aird entered the household and eventually became responsible for its homes, staff, and entertaining. In 1990, the civil list payment rose to £643,000. In 1993, Aird succeeded Gilead as private secretary. The household changed personnel without changing its basic logic. A senior official replaced another. A lady-in-waiting stayed for decades. A servant's title shifted as his practical influence grew. The Queen Mother moved between houses, but the routines were carried with her. That continuity is why the phrase operating system is useful as an interpretation. The Queen Mother's household didn't call itself an operating system. The term describes what the documented facts add up to. Inputs arrived as letters, invitations, supplies, and travel plans. Staff processed them through schedules and rank. Guests received access or a refusal. The Queen Mother's preferences became the output. The system didn't need written commands for every task. A known habit was enough. If she expected lunch at a particular hour, the kitchen, footmen, lady-in-waiting, and secretary adjusted around it. If she traveled, linen, china, silver, and furniture followed. If she hosted a reception, guests, drinks, rooms, and staff had to align. If she appeared at the gates, the public saw spontaneity. Talon and the household had prepared the scene. The power was distributed, but not equal. Courtiers organized, servants carried, suppliers delivered, relatives interpreted. Guests benefited from proximity. The Queen Mother remained at the center, and her rank determined whose time was flexible. This is also why the distinction between Clarence House and Buckingham Palace matters. Buckingham Palace was the monarch's official center. Clarence House was a smaller node with its own staff, diary, rooms, and social circle. Its reach came from the Queen Mother's identity, her family connections, and the prestige of the royal household surrounding her. A visitor didn't need to believe that she could change government policy to value her invitation. Social power often operates through recognition before it operates through decisions. The person admitted to the room had been selected. The person invited to lunch could be introduced to people who mattered. The person refused was kept outside a circle that couldn't easily be entered by ordinary means. The household protected that circle administratively. Private secretaries and ladies-in-waiting handled the correspondence. Equerries and comptrollers shaped the diary. Talon controlled practical access to private rooms. Domestic staff created the spaces in which meetings happened. The guest saw the Queen Mother. The household controlled the conditions of seeing her. That control wasn't necessarily sinister. A residence accommodating an elderly royal figure required security, scheduling, and protection from exhaustion. It would be irresponsible to treat every refusal as manipulation, or every invitation as patronage. The evidence does not show a secret political machine at Clarence House. It shows a managed environment in which rank produced consequences for other people. The clearest evidence comes from the end of the day. A bell rings. A watchman takes position. A staff member knows the bedroom is now private. The drink routine has finished. The dinner service is over, and the household has moved into the final stage of protection and attendance. The Queen Mother died at Royal Lodge, Windsor on 30 March 2002, aged 101. Clarence House had been her official London residence for nearly half a century, but she didn't die there. The household that had moved around her for decades now had to stop. When a royal household closes, staff jobs can disappear with it. The episode concerned a later generation, but it exposed an old fact. When the person at the center changes role, the people orbiting that person can suddenly lose the workplace that defined their lives. For the Queen Mother's staff, the end came in 2002. Talon was retrenched and retired. Campbell Preston's long service ended with the death of her employer. Aird's final act of service was to walk behind the Queen Mother's coffin at Westminster Abbey. The public remembered a beloved royal widow, a smile, a glass, a joke about gin. The staff inherited the consequences: retirement, redundancy, the dispersal of a household, and the loss of a social world whose rules had been learned over decades. There is no need to decide whether the Queen Mother was a villain or a saint. The evidence resists both descriptions. She could be generous, entertaining, and personally loyal. She could also expect a level of service that made personal preference operationally binding on everyone nearby. Her drinking may have been substantial. It wasn't proven alcoholism. Her nickname may have circulated among some workers in Scotland. It wasn't a universal Clarence House name. Her staff may have enjoyed prestige and personal attachment. That does not erase the hierarchy that made refusal difficult. The affectionate caricature hides the most concrete part of the story. A royal widow enjoyed a drink, but dozens of people made that enjoyment routine. A royal house hosted informal lunches, but administrators controlled the invitations. A woman appeared relaxed, but servants carried the schedule, the food, the glasses, the luggage, the linen, the dogs, and the furniture. The joke points towards the glass. The household points towards the labor. Clarence House wasn't ruled by gin. It was ruled through the conversion of preference into expectation. Elizabeth's tastes, habits, and relationships became the daily grammar of the residence, and everyone below her rank had to learn how to speak it.